In March of 1988, Gallaudet University, one of the only deaf colleges in the country, elected a new president, Margaret Zinsser. Up to this point, Gallaudet had never had a deaf president before, but students were sure this election would be different as there were two very qualified deaf candidates in the running. They were outraged at the election of Margaret Zinsser. She was the only hearing candidate in the running. This event sparked an 8-day-long protest led by the students at Gallaudet with the support of deaf faculty and staff and the entire deaf community. The students came up with a list of 4 demands during the protest. They were: number 1, the new hearing president-elect Elizabeth Zinsser must resign and be replaced with a deaf person. Number 2, board chair James Spillman must resign. Number 3, the board of trustees must consist of at least 51% deaf members. And number 4, there must be no punishment or reprisal for any protesters. This list of demands represents the students' desires to see themselves represented in their leadership. Too often, deaf individuals do not see themselves represented in leadership in our schools, in our communities, and in our country. These are the events from the protest in chronological order.
We picked Dr. Elizabeth Ann Zinsser as the 7th president of Gallaudet. Was because she is a very talented educator.
The students on Monday morning actually took control of the campus. They locked all the gates all around. Some of the administrators and some other people couldn't get onto campus. They had to stay out. That forced the Board of Trustees to come here to meet with some of the students, faculty, and staff. That's when we presented our 4 demands. The first one was that Zinsser resign and a deaf president be selected. The second one was that the chairman of the Board of Trustees, Spillman, resign. Third, there would be a 51% majority of deaf members on the board. And fourth, that there be no reprisals. These were the 4 demands. The board decided to ignore them.
Behind me, and as any board of trustees in any university, it is simply the role of the board of trustees to select a president. They have done that. It is the role of the board of trustees to remove a president. They have not done that.
I gave a statement recognizing the legal authority of the board to name the president of Gallaudet University. In fact, my personal reaction to the board's decision was and is anger. Anger as it continues. The students, joined by the staff and faculty, have focused the world's attention on the larger issues. I must now publicly affirm my support for the point of view held by the Gallaudet community.
Therefore, that the best way to restore order and return this university to its business of education was to pave the way for the Board of Trustees to consider the selection of a president who is hearing impaired. I tendered my resignation last night.
Is of Gallaudet University and from the board. I took this step willingly because I believe strongly that it is in the best interest of the university.
My message, very brief, but very important. That message is a deaf person can do anything a hearing person can except hear.
Finally, after 8 long days of protest, I, King Jordan, became the first deaf president of Gallaudet University.
After the protest, some big changes were made on the campus of Gallaudet and also off the campus in the deaf community. All of the demands from the protests were met, including Gallaudet having the first deaf president, also Spillman resigning from the Board of Trustees and was replaced by Philip Robin, who was also the first deaf person to be on the Board of Trustees. Some other effects from the protest that affected Gallaudet was that sign language started to become the standard communication on the university. Before, a lot of people working for Gallaudet wasn't hard of hearing or deaf, so sign language wasn't important for them. Also, a few years after the protest, Congress has passed multiple laws for the protection and rights of deaf people. Here are some of the laws passed by Congress from the movement.
The view of Gallaudet before the Deaf President Now movement was interesting to find information on. It was rather difficult to see how people viewed this deaf community in particular before the DPN movement, but the deaf community seemed moderately ignored, and that was something they really wanted to speak up on and kind of show themselves with this movement. Even on the day of the announcement, only one photographer was at the event, and that was just kind of shocking because you'd expect there to be a little more traction on a movement as passionate as these students have been. And deaf teachers and students such as Joseph L. Halkett, who was an alumni of Gallaudet, really kept a close eye on the event. So now during the Deaf President Now movement is where this really began to kick off, so to speak, for the students. They became a spotlight of hope and inspiration. They were seen as strong, inspiring leaders, speaking up for a movement that they believed in. People across the country, like we talked about in the last slide, found themselves very inspired. And the best example of this is, of course, Mike O'Donnell, who was a deaf kind of congressional staff member fighting on what he calls the opposite sideline, but found himself so moved and inspired as a deaf person that he ended up marching with the students in favor of the Deaf President Now movement. Once the Deaf President Now movement came to a close, the deaf community found themselves in the spotlight in more of a positive way, so to speak. They had a long-lasting positive impact for the deaf community and encouraged others in and out of the deaf community to stand up for what they believe in, such as the deaf grassroots movement. Deaf people across the country shared this positive impact and influence as a community had seemingly more progress than they had in years. They were in the spotlight. They were seen as people in the community for the first time in what felt like a very long time.
To this day, landmark events like Deaf President Now continue to encourage the future of the deaf community. Students at Gallaudet University are prepared for success in the hearing world and are taught to believe in their abilities, even if no one else does. Gallaudet University offers a full entrepreneurship program which trains deaf students to be prepared for careers in the hearing world. Thanks to the Deaf President Now movement, there is a generation of deaf and hearing people alike who believe that the deaf community is capable of anything that hearing people are. Empowered by the movement, deaf people are pursuing jobs that were previously considered off limits for them. Hearing people are learning that deaf people are more than capable of functioning in a hearing world. Although there has been much progress made towards equality and accessibility for the deaf community, there is still much work to be done. The deaf community is still fighting for rights regarding accessibility and fighting against appropriation of the deaf culture. The Deaf Grassroots Movement is a group who continues to fight for the rights of the deaf community today. Another issue that the deaf community currently faces is cultural appropriation. While there are many talented deaf actors, producers, cinematographers, and photographers in the industry, there is a lack of representation of deaf individuals in media. Unfortunately, many deaf actors are not chosen to play deaf roles. While it is exciting that more deaf stories are being portrayed in media, deaf actors should be heavily involved in this process as they know their own stories better than anyone else.